Skeleton Crew has just concluded on Disney Plus, which means we now have 7 live-action Star Wars shows on Disney Plus. So today we're going to rank all 7 of those shows from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Zach, and I started this YouTube channel because I cannot watch movies or TV shows without needing to talk about them afterwards. If you find yourself the same way, you're in the right place. Consider hitting that subscribe button. Also, before I get into this ranking, I did a tier ranking of all of the seasons of the Star Wars Disney Plus shows last week. You can check that out right up there through that card if you want a more casual ranking video. This is going to be a more proper ranking video from the worst to the best. While I'm talking, join me down in the comment section. This is just my list. I'd love to see your list of how you would rank these Disney Plus Star Wars shows. With all of that out of the way, let's just kick it off with my number 7. And in that last spot, without hesitation from me, is going to be The Acolyte. And The Acolyte is one of also the most disappointing efforts from Disney Plus Star Wars. Because when this show was announced, it actually sounded really intriguing. It was presented to us as being a murder mystery within the Star Wars galaxy. It was going to have a focus on the Sith side of the Force. And what we ended up getting from The Acolyte, I just feel was nothing that they promised us from the get-go. The murder mystery, the whodunit aspect of this show was basically told and solved for us in the first 2 episode premiere. After that, it really didn't feel like this show had much of a structure to its plot. It didn't really feel like it had an idea, a crystal clear idea of where it was heading. It gave us characters that I never really got invested in. I never cared about anybody on this show. It took Jedi lore that was established in like the Phantom Menace and the prequels that Star Wars fans already aren't a big fan of. It doubled down on it, making the Jedi in this even more unlikable, even more kind of religious fanatics, where they feel it's their right to take children just because they have force-sensible abilities. Doesn't make any sense. It didn't make them any more likable. And when you take the Jedi in Star Wars that you just want to root for, that everybody when they were a kid wanted to be a Jedi, and you just bring them down to these characters that just seem like such jerks and a-holes, you just ruin it. You just ruin one of the core aspects of what people enjoy in the Star Wars universe. On top of that, the whole twin angle in this show with Osha and whatever the other one, May, whatever her name was, I never cared about them. I never cared about their story. The whole light side, dark side switcheroo that they tried to do to entice us and make these characters interesting just never really worked for me. Credit where credit is due. The lightsaber action in this show was actually really incredible. The choreography, the lightsaber on lightsaber battle was some of the best we've seen since the Phantom Menace with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan against Darth Maul. Other than that, though, I didn't feel like this show offered much that I wanted to see. The Power 1, the Power 2, the Power of Many was not enough to save this show from being at my last spot. I really dislike this show. I don't ever want to watch it again. Which brings us to number 6, and that's going to be the Book of Boba Fett. Now look, I've never been the biggest fan of the Boba Fett character. He's been a fan-beloved character since he first came up in, I guess, technically the Star Wars Holiday Special. That's a little bit of a deep cut, but with Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, that's kind of where that character first was introduced. I liked him well enough in those movies. I didn't feel like he did all that much, though, to make him that interesting to me. But when you brought Boba Fett into Mandalorian Season 2, had him kicking butt, almost like a John Wick type action hero in that show. When they announced that they were going to do a show on Boba Fett, I was all in. I was like, all right, the character feels he's finally on that pedestal that so many other people put him on, that I've never seen him on, so let's see how this show can show us that Boba Fett even more. And then I just found that this show was a just realized I forgot to switch the graphic. But then this show was just such a bore to me, where they took this Boba Fett character that they established in Mandalorian Season 2, and they made him goofy. They made him a doof. There are many times in this where Boba Fett just walks up to someone, I am Boba Fett. Whether he's holding a droid, I am Boba Fett. He's not intimidating. He doesn't seem like a person that you should be scared of when he walks into a room. anymore. A lot of this show too, the pacing was just abysmal. A lot of this is just Boba Fett taking baths and having flashbacks to time of his life that I don't really care about seeing. There's dumb decisions made in this where Boba Fett escapes from the Sarlacc pit wearing all of his armor. Then later on he's looking for his armor, so he thinks it might be in the Sarlacc pit that he just escaped. Doesn't make any sense. Very stupid. And then the show stops being a Boba Fett show and just sneaks in 2 episodes of Mandalorian season 2.5 in there to connect to Mandalorian season 3. Really feels like it comes out of nowhere. Doesn't really fit into the structure of the story of the Book of Boba Fett. They were the most entertaining episodes, but as a whole, the Book of Boba Fett to me was a complete misfire. There's very little about it that I enjoyed, especially that included the Boba Fett character. And when your title character of your show is almost my least favorite part of the show, you got a problem. Bringing us into the top 5, I've got Ahsoka. And the fact that Ahsoka is cracking the top 5 kind of tells you how lackluster a lot of these Disney Plus Star Wars shows have been to me, because I don't really even like Ahsoka all that much. Now, this is going to be a kind of controversial placement for this show, because if you watch Clone Wars, if you watch Rebels, and you've been with this Ahsoka character since the start, you probably love this series. I know that my brother, who has been watching Clone Wars and Rebels since basically they started, loves this show because this is kind of mostly a continuation of Rebels. This is basically Rebels season 4 or whatever it is. But for a casual Star Wars fan like me, who doesn't have all the time in the world to watch those animated shows, mostly just sticks to the live action content, this was less of an on-ramp for me to get on board with this character and this side of Star Wars than it was alienating to me as a casual fan, because there wasn't really anything in here that I connected with, because it was so tied to what had been happening in the animated shows, to the point that the crux, the whole stake of this show is we're looking for this guy Ezra. I never met Ezra. I don't care about Ezra. I'm not even sure what the relationship between all these characters and Ezra is. Now, I'm not meaning to get too hyped up, angry about this show, because this show didn't anger me necessarily. There were things in it I really liked. I thought that Hayden Christensen come back in here as Anakin was such a joy. I had such a great time seeing him reprise his role. Getting to see flashbacks to the Clone Wars with Hayden Christensen's Anakin in there was such a fan service treat that I'm always thankful this show gave me. Ray Stevens as the Sith Lord villain in this, I thought was great. He was one of the most enticing and intimidating villains in Star Wars we've had in years. But even the big bad that's talked up throughout the entire season of Ahsoka, Thrawn, never really came across as that intimidating to me. He never really came across as that big of a threat. The show just failed to get me captivated emotionally into the characters, into the story. I didn't care about a lot that was going on. Enjoyed the fan service moments, but that's about it. And then that brings us to my biggest heartbreak at number 4, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now, like many Star Wars fans, for years I was clamoring to get more Hugh McGregor, more Hayden Christensen in Star Wars. I wanted a Vader movie. I wanted an Obi-Wan movie, which this Obi-Wan series was announced as years back. Eventually, they converted it and changed it into this Disney Plus series. Thus, my excitement for this show was over the moon. I could not wait to see what they had in store for us. This was taking place 10 years after Revenge of the Sith. Hayden Christensen, Hugh McGregor, they were coming back. Hayden Christensen was going to be Darth Vader. They were going to have a rematch. All of it was just posed to hype me up so much that the letdown was just so much greater. Obi-Wan Kenobi, to me, is one of the biggest misfires, one of the biggest missteps that the Disney Plus shows, that the Disney Plus Star Wars shows have had thus far. Now, it's not necessarily a bad show. There's a lot in Obi-Wan that I did find quite enjoyable. Frankly, with the Hugh McGregor and Hayden Christensen return as Obi-Wan and Darth Vader, going more into that conflict, having Obi-Wan and Vader once again go up against each other in the finale of this show was as emotionally exciting and satisfying as I was hoping that it would be when this show was first conceived. But throughout the journey of the show, I just found that there were so many storylines that were redundant and repetitive, of Obi-Wan having to go rescue Leia and then getting Leia and then losing Leia and having to go rescue her again and losing her again, having to go rescue her again. And in the span of only 6 episodes, it felt like they did the same storyline like 3 times within the limited series run. You also had some really cheap-looking sets, some cheap-looking production. Some of the blocking in this was just atrocious. Obi-Wan hiding Leia within his coat to sneak her past not just a bunch of stormtroopers, a base. They're in an Imperial base of stormtroopers and Imperials, and he's just got Leia, hiding in his jacket, walking past all these guys. Just unforgivable writing, unforgivable direction, unforgivable blocking. Obi-Wan had some of the highest of highs for me of Star Wars, had some of the lowest of lows of these Star Wars Disney Plus shows as well. Unfortunately, I wish it was the one that I loved the most. I wish I loved it as much as I wanted to love it. I don't. It's fine. So I have it at number 4. Which brings us to our top 3, which is going to kick off with Skeleton Crew, the series that just concluded on Disney Plus. And do I love Skeleton Crew? No, I don't love Skeleton Crew, but I had a really good time watching Skeleton Crew. And what this show did so great was it delivered on the promise that it set out to be. When this was first announced by John Watts, they said that this was going to harken back to that Amblin Goonies type feeling of filmmaking, of storytelling, with kids in a kid's story, but not necessarily made for kids that adults could enjoy as well. And I feel like they did capture that all throughout the entire series, all throughout the entire season. I just found this show delightful and charming. I had so much fun with the pirate storyline that was going on there. Jude Law with these ensemble of kids just elevated the story, just elevated this crew and the dynamics so much when he was introduced into the show. The kids themselves were so cute, were so fun to go on this Star Wars galaxy adventure with. All of them had great dynamics, great relationships with each other. It was a Star Wars show, it was a Star Wars adventure that just gave that sense, once again, of adventure in Star Wars. It wasn't the highest of stakes. It wasn't the most compelling of storylines, although they did throw in some really fun mystery elements involving the kids and their planet and what exactly their planet is, where it came from. All that stuff was really fun and intriguing and new and different to introduce into a show like this, where even though it's not the greatest of great Star Wars content, of great Star Wars stories, it was just fun. Through and through, delightful and charming, and I just really enjoyed it. Our runner-up is Mandalorian. Now, when it comes to Mandalorian, Season 3, I will admit, their most recent season was a step down. There was a lot in Season 3, felt meandering, didn't feel like they had it fully plotted out, fully structured like they had the first 2 seasons. So Season 3 does bring this down just a little bit. But the previous 2 seasons of Mandalorian is what keeps it at number 2 for me. When Mandalorian came out, Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker, the fan base was completely divided in Star Wars. Still is today, obviously. But for a brief moment, Mandalorian was that harmonious celebration that brought all the Star Wars fans together for pretty much the last time that ever happened, because the show was just so fun. It was so fun to go deeper into the corners of this Star Wars universe, meet new characters, meet new species, new creatures, as well as doing what a lot of these Disney Plus Star Wars shows haven't been able to do, which is introduce new characters into the pulp culture zeitgeist with Mandalorian and Baby Yoda. When these two burst onto the scene, Baby Yoda memes ended up being everywhere. Even people who didn't watch Star Wars, I'm looking at you, Grandma, they were posting a bunch of Baby Yoda content all over their social medias because they just took the world by storm, to the point that these are the only Disney Plus characters that are moving on to the theatrical screen with Star Wars, Mandalorian, and Grogu next year. There's just a lot that this show did right. There's a lot that it did to bring the Star Wars fandom together. There's a lot that it did to reinvigorate the excitement of being in the Star Wars universe, with meeting new characters in Star Wars. That Mandalorian is still one of the highest highs of Star Wars Disney Plus content. But that brings us to my number one pick, and that is going to be Star Wars Andor. When Star Wars Andor was first announced, coming off of Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, which I liked Rogue One, A Star Wars Story quite a bit, but I never really cared all that much about the characters in Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, least of all Cassian Andor. So when they announced that they were going to be giving Cassian Andor his own show on Disney Plus, I felt like I couldn't care less. And then the show came out and just completely blew me away. A lot of ways that people describe Andor is that it is Star Wars for grown-ups. While I think that that's a little bit pretentious in some ways to say, I do see where they're coming from, because Andor came out and just kind of blew me away with how serious the tone was, how mature the storytelling and the stories within Andor were, the slow burn that it kind of was, where when you're in the Star Wars universe, in the Star Wars galaxy, you're used to fast-paced, quick, fun, exciting sequences, where Andor kind of took its time and told a really in-depth story and realistic look in some ways at how the Empire works and functions in this universe, and how the people living in the oppressed state of the Empire go through life. And it's all through the eyes of Andor. And I just found a lot of the stories in this, a lot of the situations that Andor finds himself in, fascinating and very compelling within the Star Wars universe. And the production value in this is fantastic. It looks gorgeous. They shot on real locations as opposed to something like Obi-Wan, which used the volume. So it just gives it that better look of almost like a film as opposed to a TV show. Andor just completely, absolutely is my number one favorite thing that I have ever watched from Star Wars on Disney Plus, because it feels like taking the Star Wars galaxy and these Star Wars stories seriously and putting them through that mature eye that, as a 26-year-old, at the time 24-year-old, just was kind of at the place in his life that he was looking for that kind of Star Wars content. Andor came, delivered it. Cannot wait for season 2. As it is for right now, Andor is my number one favorite Star Wars Disney Plus series. Don't forget to tell me down below how you guys would rank the Star Wars Disney Plus shows thus far. Also, don't forget I got a tier ranking that's a little bit more casual of these shows, these seasons, that you can check out right up there. Got another video right down there if you like content like this. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching and hearing me out. Don't just watch movies and TV, talk movies and TV. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.